sect master actually doesn't have to care too much. Although Emperor treasure power is unfathomable, they are limited by their cultivation level, that is, they can only be used as one-shot trading with one blow. After one blow, they can't do anything. You have experienced it yourself, and you should know better than anyone else. Seeing Xianxia's dismayed look, Xian said comfortingly, "That is also true." Xianxia nodded lightly. His fear was greatly reduced, and he suddenly relaxed a lot. The power of the secret treasure has always been linked to the strength of the user, so even if the secret treasure is of high grade, no matter how powerful it is, if the strength of the cultivator using it is not enough, it will not be able to spur the shocking power. The dragon bone verdant sword is like this. Although Xianxia uses it now like his own arm, it will not be half obscure, but he always feels that it has great potential to be tapped. This potential is not in the dragon bone verdant sword itself, but in himself. His own strength limits the use of dragon bone verdant sword. If the sect master wants to do something this time, you might as well take this palace master with you. Since Star Emperor Mountain has already deviated from the original idea, this palace master naturally can't just sit back and watch, and I'll also want to meet and settle the old accounts. Oh. Xianxia raised his brows, and his heart was burning with a gossip. He actually wanted to know why Xian left Star Emperor Mountain back then. After all, she was at the helm of this behemoth at the beginning. Her status and prestige are extremely respected. If it were not for compelling difficulties, she would definitely not leave there and live in seclusion for hundreds of years. But this kind of thing is really difficult to ask. If Xian is willing to say, he will certainly listen to her, and it is meaningless to say it reluctantly. To be sure, Xian and Star Emperor Mountain, there is absolutely grievance. After pondering for a while, Xianxia didn't ask his doubts but said with a serious face, "I planned this way. Great Elder, listen to it. If there is anything wrong, please give some pointers." Right now, Xianxia talked about his plan. An hour later, Xianxia left Beiwahu and returned to Heaven One Palace. The palace was extremely quiet. Xianxia sat cross-legged. Take out the feather spirit arrow. Pour the Saint Yuan into it and charge it. This time, the secret treasure obtained in Fallen Emperor Mountain is indeed quite powerful, although there is a limit on the number of times it can be used. But still can't obliterate its miraculous effect. A cultivator of second-order void return stage couldn't stop its one-shot power at all, and the third-order void return stage like Guzheng could only evade it. Not dare to meet it. In Fallen Emperor Mountain, after the energy consumption of the feather spirit arrow, Xianxia naturally wanted to recharge it. Only half an hour before and after, if it's alright. Xianxia carefully put it away, and when he was about to prepare for this action again, he suddenly changed his expression, grinned, stared at a certain place on the ground, and waited quietly. After a while, a small head appeared strangely on the ground over there, with sharp edges and corners, tough lines, like a stubborn stone, but the two eyes on the head were extremely bright and enlightened. Stone puppet. This time Xianxia went out without bringing the stone puppet, but left it in the sect. For one thing, Xianxia didn't expect that there would be so many twists and turns on this trip, and he had to deal with that kind of battle, otherwise bringing a stone puppet would be a big help. Secondly, the stone puppet has another task. The task of the stone puppet is to guard the stone embryo of another stone puppet. After coming out of the Emperor Garden last time, Xianxia merged the blood essence stone with the stone embryo, hoping to give birth to a second stone puppet, so he handed over the task of guarding it to Xiao. Now that he returned to the sect, it felt his presence, and immediately came to the Heaven One Palace. Don't know if the second stone puppet was born smoothly. Xianxia was full of expectations. But when he looked at the little stone puppet, he couldn't help frowning, and quickly asked, "What's the matter?" Its originally clear and bright eyes revealed a panic. As soon as it rushed out of the ground, he immediately crawled in front of Xianxia with his hands and feet, and then squatted on his waist and grabbed Xianxia's trousers. He uttered some weird language and eagerly dragged Xianxia out. What happened? As the owner of the stone puppet, Xianxia can naturally feel its irritability and anxiety, but the stone puppet is also a kind of creature with low intelligence. Xianxia only let it absorb a drop of golden blood when it born, so he can't clearly feel its thoughts. "Let me go with you?" Xianxia asked again, and stone puppet nodded his head sharply. "Lead the way." Xianxia nodded lightly, letting the stone puppet drag him, letting it go outside. Soon, one person and one stone puppet left the general rudder of High Heaven sect and headed to the depths of the continuous mountain range. The general rudder of the High Heaven sect now stands on the site of the original ancient supreme profound sect, and this site is extremely broad. The family of the High Heaven sect is small and only occupies a very small part. The place that Stone Puppet took Xianxia to now was regarded as headquarters of the supreme profound sect, but it was just a peak above. The peak is tall and straight, towering into the clouds, chaotic and beautiful scenery. An hour later, the stone puppet took Xianxia to the top of the mountain. At that peak, there was a spacious square-like platform and a gorgeous palace standing there. It's thought to be the palace that Supreme Profound Sect built before, but now it is empty. And as soon as he headed to the palace, a blood-red weird round stone about the size of a pot was placed on the ground, and it was faintly visible, and the strong spiritual energy around it was dragged into the round stone. You can even hear bursts of clanging, heartbeat-like movements coming from the cobblestones, powerful and rhythmic. The stone embryo of the second stone puppet. Xianxia's eyes lit up. The stone embryo is well taken care of by Xiao. After fusing with the blood essence stone, it almost has its own life, but what makes people feel strange is that the creatures conceived inside have not broken out of the shell. According to the truth, after a long time, it should have been born. Xianxia frowned. With his eyesight, he naturally saw the impropriety of the stone embryo. No wonder Xiao was so impatient. After arriving here, Xiao rushed to the stone embryo, anxiously turned around, scratching his ears and cheeks. It looked like a monkey that had been scratching the itch. No matter what he did, he couldn't be satisfied. "Let me see, don't worry." Xianxia let out a comfort, and the stone puppet was really obedient, and immediately sat aside, watching eagerly. The stone embryo breeds its kind. Even if Xiao is not very intelligent, he knows how to love his kind. Xianxia came to the stone embryo, released his spiritual mind, his face changed slightly. Unimaginable energy has actually been condensed in the stone embryo, and it is continuously increasing. He don't know why the heaven and earth aura is too strong here. The stone embryo is constantly absorbing the world's spiritual energy from all around. The heartbeat sound became more obvious and more powerful, but no matter how Xianxia explored it, the creatures bred in it showed no signs of breaking out of the shell, not even a trace of divine soul fluctuations. The absence of divine soul fluctuations means that its life is incomplete and no spiritual wisdom has been born. Xianxia was confused. He didn't know how to deal with it. Yang Yan told him the special creatures like stone puppets, otherwise he would know that such peculiar lives actually existed in this vast world. As for how the stone puppet can be born safely and what to do at this moment, he knows nothing. Perhaps if Yang Yan was here, she could solve his confusion. But since the returning from Emperor Garden, Yang Yan had merged with the great Emperor's body and fell into a deep sleep. Even if Xianxia went to her, he could not get any help. After thinking about it carefully, Xianxia reached out and touched the stone embryo. No matter what, the energy stored in the stone embryo at this moment is too huge, and it must be wrong. The stone embryo failed to be born smoothly, failed to give birth to spiritual wisdom, and it is very likely to be related to this huge energy. The so-called emptiness is probably the truth. Xianxia wanted to channel the energy inside so as not to cause any harm to the fragile stone embryo. But his hand touched the stone embryo, and a complicated pattern suddenly emerged from the stone embryo. After the pattern was rotated, it turned into a terrifying energy, and hit Xianxia. Xianxia's expression changed drastically, and he quickly avoided. With a squeak, the energy flew across his body and hit the sky directly. After a few breaths, the hole appeared in the distant sky, as if the blow had pierced the sky. Xianxia looked shocked, and never dared to act rashly anymore. Xiao stared at him, uttering inexplicable words, as if begging for something. Both eyes were full of sadness. Xianxia shook his head slowly. By now, he might be helpless, and everything has to go with the flow. As if understanding Xianxia's thoughts, Xiao's expression became a little wilted, with his head drooping, just sitting there stupidly, staring at the stone embryo in front of him. As time passed slowly, the energy contained in the stone embryo became greater and greater, and the rhythm like a heartbeat became more and more rapid, so rapid that it made Xianxia throb. It was an extremely abnormal rhyme, as if a drumbeat was continuous, and with the sound, the light on the stone embryo began to flicker, bright and dark. This situation continued for a full 5 days, and the situation did not change until the 5th day. The blood-red light on the stone embryo suddenly shined, extremely dazzling, and at the same time, a sensational energy wave broke out from the stone embryo. Xianxia's eyes widened, staring at the movement ahead unmovingly. Leisurely, the light dimmed, and the dense agitation was also annihilated at the same time, and the sensational energy fluctuations contained in the stone embryo disappeared. Xianxia's eyes widened, letting out his mind to perceive the movement ahead. His face darkened. That stone embryo, even the life fluctuations that it had originally had disappeared, as if it was really just a stubborn stone that can be seen everywhere. Xiao was also aware, and quickly rushed to the stone embryo, patted it with both hands, groaning in his mouth, not knowing what he was talking about, then picked it up, sent it to Xianxia, and stuffed it into his arms. He obviously wanted him to think of a solution. Xianxia opened his mouth, speechless, and sighed deeply. To be continued. As the master of Xianxia, Xianxia can naturally feel the irritability and anxiety in his heart at this moment. If he can, he will definitely not refuse a small request. However, Xianxia didn't know much about the creatures like the stone puppet, and didn't know what went wrong at the moment, causing the second stone puppet to not only fail to break out of the shell, but also annihilated. Even if he has the intention, there is nothing he can do. The master and servant were connected with each other. Perceiving Xianxia's helplessness, the light of Xiao's eyes gradually dimmed. It sucked its nose lightly, like an aggrieved child. It took a long time before it gently placed the stone embryo in front of Xianxia, and then carefully touched it, as if he was afraid that it would cause any damage to the stone embryo by moving too much. Immediately, Xiao rushed to the edge of the cliff of this 10,000-high peak, thumping his chest with his hands, clanging loudly, making a drum-like sound, and his small body quickly became bigger, and in the blink of an eye he became a stone giant with a height of more than 10 feet. Like a huge orangutan standing on the top of the peak, with a rickety waist, hands hanging down, staring at the sky. A long howl, like a billowing dragon, came from its mouth. The howling sound spread directly to the sky, containing unimaginable destructive power, stirring up the sea of clouds. The howling was full of indelible sorrow and grief. A drop of something like crystal clear jade slipped from the little eyes and fell to the ground with a crisp sound. The stone puppet cried. Xianxia never thought that the stone puppet would have a day of tears. He couldn't imagine the meaning of the second stone puppet's stone embryo to Xiao. It makes it so sad, but looking at it at this moment, its back is depressed and lonely. It seems that in the world, only it is alone, and will eventually be alone for life. Xianxia got up, hurriedly came to the stone embryo, stretched out a golden blood red, and swiped around his wrist. A few inches long, a bone-in-depth wound appeared immediately, and golden blood diffused out of the wound. One drop after another dripped into the stone embryo. It shouldn't be like this. The birth of Xiao went smoothly. Xianxia was also confused at the time. It was Xiao himself that merged with the blood essence stone in the black book space, and then easily broke out of the shell. Why is the second one so hard? Even at this moment, even the fluctuation of life disappeared. No matter what, it is similar to Xiao. So Xiao have placed thousands of times more expectations than him. Xianxia didn't believe that such a creature with strong vitality really died like this. Do your best, listen to your destiny. There was a ticking sound. Drop after drop of pure golden blood fell on this stone embryo. The golden blood contains unimaginable power and vitality. When Xiaoxiao was born, Xianxia had done this, but only a drop of golden blood was paid. But now, he doesn't care about the cost. Perceiving Xianxia's movements, Xiaoxiao also immediately turned and ran over, squatting in front of Xianxia, looking at him with a gratitude, and at the stone embryo from time to time, with a look of loss and hope. As time passed by, the stone embryo was completely dyed golden, but to Xianxia's disappointment, his golden blood actually did not play any role, and the stone embryo showed no signs of absorption. This made him look sad. Xiaoxiao was also anxious like an ant on a hot pan, breathing uneasy. Leisurely, a very weak wave came from the stone embryo. Xianxia was happy and moved. He thought that he was expecting too much and had an illusion, but when he carefully released his spiritual mind to investigate, he couldn't bear it, his brows full with joy. There is really a wave of fluctuations coming from the stone embryo. That is the fluctuation of life. As if a single spark can set off a prairie fire, when this extremely weak wave that can be annihilated at any time spreads, the stone embryo begins to absorb the pure golden blood dripping on it, visible to the naked eye. The original unacceptable golden blood drops little by little, poured into the stone embryo. Dong! Dong! The sound like a heartbeat echoed at the top of this peak again. That was the rhythm of life. Xianxia grinned, and the sorrow in stone puppet's eyes disappeared, replaced by nervousness and worry. Dong! Dong! The sound is getting louder and the time interval is getting shorter and shorter. The original annihilated life fluctuations once again spread from the stone embryo, and the dim light blooms again at this moment, but it is different from the beginning. The light at this moment is blood red. Among them, mixed with a golden light, it looks very mysterious. Patterns emerge from the surface of the stone embryo, like a living thing, passing away in a flash. Xianxia was surprised when he saw it. When Xiaoxiao was born, he hadn't seen such a scene, and he didn't know how this stone puppet was different from Xiaoxiao. The sun and the moon rose, and 3 days passed in a flash. Xianxia had already stopped dripping the golden blood into the stone embryo. After absorbing a full 20 or 30 drops of pure golden blood, the stone embryo regained its brilliance. At this moment, Xianxia and Xiaoxiao are waiting anxiously beside them. A soft click came out leisurely. Xianxia's expression lifted, and he quickly stared at it. Under this look, he couldn't help being overjoyed. A small crack appeared on the stone embryo. Not long after that crack appeared, more cracks appeared one after another. Then, the stone embryo was covered with dense, crisscross-like spider webs. Crack! The stone embryo broke apart, revealing the life bred in it. The second stone puppet. Like a chick breaking its shell, it burrows out of the stone embryo with difficulty and looks at this new and unfamiliar world. Its movements were very clumsy. It seemed that it was just born, and it took a long time to get out of the stone embryo and sit on the ground. It's just that. It was actually a golden stone puppet, which surprised Xianxia. His whole body was golden, as if it was wearing golden armor, and he didn't know if it was related to the drop of so much golden blood. Just like when Xiaoxiao was born, after this golden stone puppet sat upright, the first thing was to swallow all the fragments of the stone embryo into its abdomen. The speed was so fast that there was no chewing movement. After swallowing, it sat there foolishly, motionless. Xiaoxiao is jumping up and down, and the joy was beyond words. It wasn't over yet. It actually rushed to its companions, reached out to pick it up, put it on its shoulders, and sprinted around the top of the peak, laps, and laps, repeating monotonously, without knowing fatigue. Xianxia laughed dumbly, but his brows were slightly frowned in joy. A creature like the stone puppet was born with low intelligence, and so was Xiaoxiao. It was only happy for the safe birth of its companions, and was happy to have similar companions in the future, but Xianxia faintly felt something wrong. There seemed to be something wrong with the golden stone puppet. It took a long time for Xianxia to stop Xiaoxiao and let it put down the second stone puppet. Xiaoxiao would naturally not resist the order. Xianxia then took a closer look. After a while, his brow furrowed tighter. Sure enough, this golden stone puppet looked stronger than Xiaoxiao at the beginning of its birth, but its intelligence was not as good as Xiaoxiao, and it could even be said that it was completely in a state of chaos. After Xiaoxiao put it down, it just stood there, far from being lively and active. Xianxia tried to give it several orders, but it did not respond at all. In complete spiritual wisdom, Xianxia's expression sank. Although the creatures like stone puppets are not very intelligent, they are also some spiritual wisdom, but with the golden stone puppets, it's almost non-existent. He don't know if it has anything to do with the tribulations of its birth. The current golden stone puppet, although it is also a creature, is no different from a fool, and even inferior to a fool. Realizing this, Xianxia stood up in silence. Fortunately, Xiaoxiao couldn't notice this kind of thing, otherwise he didn't know what kind of grief it would have. Well thinking, Xiaoxiao had already offered a treasure, as if to spit out a piece of unrefined rare ore, and sent it to his companion graciously. Fortunately, although the golden stone puppet has no intelligence, it still has an instinctive reaction. It actually knows and picked up the rare ore and gnawed it. The sound of the click came into his ears, swallowed it into his abdomen in 3 or 2, and then continued to stand still. Xiaoxiao didn't seem to know where he had offended this companion, making it so cold towards him, scratching his head in confusion, and could only continue to take out more ore and send it over. The latter also did not reject it. The two little guys cooperate very well. Looking at the golden stone puppet, Xianxia sighed slightly. Although this situation is better than it was at the beginning, it is not perfect. Fortunately, he has tried his best. The golden stone puppet has no intelligence, and it is really powerless to recover. Looking at it, Xianxia's expression moved, and suddenly he remembered something. His expression changed endlessly. After a while, his eyes lit up, and he looked at the golden stone puppet carefully, with a hint of excitement on his face. He suddenly remembered how to make this golden stone puppet act on its own. Golden stone puppet are now showing dementia because of incomplete spiritual wisdom. If this problem can be solved, all the problems will be solved. Xianxia can't complement its intelligence, but it can be implanted. He knows Wisp of Spirit. The technique of Wisp of Spirit was created by the great demon god. On the Tongshuan continent, the great demon god has shocking and stunning talent. There is no one better than him. He is a legendary figure. In the holy tomb of the 9 heavens holy land, Xianxia occasionally received a drop of golden blood from the great demon god. After refining it, he realized from the golden blood a secret technique of the great demon god, which was the technique of Wisp of Spirit. Even though he had practiced it at that time, he had never found a suitable carrier, so he could only cultivate this Wisp of Spirit and poo it on the consciousness sea. Later, he entered the star territory and fell into the floating continent. There, Xianxia was forced by the ghost ancestors to test the operation of the space law formation for him. At that time, he was forced to do so. Xianxia did not dare to take risks personally, so he could only let out his Wisp of Spirit and enter the space law formation. Although the Wisp of Spirit was greatly damaged and almost annihilated, after so many years of nourishment, the Wisp of Spirit has returned to its original state. Not only that, it is many times stronger than before. This spirit clone is a very special existence because Xianxia cultivates it separately, so it has nothing to do with his own consciousness. Even if it disappears, it will not affect him. To be continued.